The first time my mother took something from me, I was 9 years old. It wasn't money. It wasn't property. It was a painting. I'd spent 2 weeks making it in art class. A messy watercolor of Boston Harbor with crooked boats and a sunset that looked more orange than real life. My teacher pinned it in the hallway outside the gym during parent night, and I remember standing there waiting for my mother to see it. When Victoria Harrison finally stopped in front of it, she didn't smile. She tilted her head slightly and said, "The perspective is off." That was it. No good job. No, I'm proud of you. Just criticism wrapped in elegance. I remember staring at the paper afterward, wondering how something I loved could suddenly look embarrassing. Back then, I thought that feeling was normal. I didn't know children weren't supposed to grow up terrified of disappointing their parents. I didn't know love wasn't supposed to feel conditional. And I definitely didn't know that 23 years later, that same woman would slap me across the face in a ballroom full of Boston elites because I refused to hand over my inheritance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The story really started on a Tuesday night in March of 2021. I was sitting alone in my apartment in Somerville, eating cold pad thai straight from the carton while reviewing kitchen blueprints for a client's renovation. My studio apartment was tiny, one wall of exposed brick, drafting table by the window. Plants everywhere because I had a habit of trying to make every place feel softer than it was. Outside, rain tapped against the glass. Inside, my phone lit up with my grandmother's name, Eleanor Harrison. Even now, hearing her voice in my memory feels different from everyone else in my family. Steadier, cleaner, like someone who never wasted words because she respected them too much. "Paige," she said, "are you busy?" "Not really. I need you to listen carefully." That sentence alone made me sit up straighter. My grandmother had taught constitutional law at Harvard for over 3 decades. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't emotional in the way other people were emotional. If she sounded serious, there was a reason. I muted the television and pushed my takeout container aside. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said. "I've finalized changes to my estate plan." I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. "Okay. The penthouse in Seaport will belong to you after I'm gone." For a second, I genuinely thought I misunderstood her. The penthouse. The apartment she bought in 2015 after retiring from Harvard. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, private terrace, 2 bedrooms, library walls lined with first-edition books and old photographs from places she'd traveled. I'd spent Christmases there, Sunday dinners there, snowstorms there. That apartment held entire chapters of my life. "Grandma, it's done," she said calmly. "The paperwork will be filed next month." I stood up and walked toward the kitchen sink because suddenly I couldn't sit still anymore. Why me? There was no manipulation in the question. I truly didn't understand. I had a sister, parents, cousins. The Harrison family treated inheritance like a blood sport. Property was status. Money was identity. Nobody in that family gave away something worth millions without consequences following behind it. "You visit me," Eleanor said simply. I leaned against the counter. "That's not a reason to give someone a penthouse." "It is for me." Rain streaked down my window in silver lines. "For 10 years, she continued, you've shown up every Sunday unless you were sick or traveling. You bring tulips because you remember they are my favorite flower. You sit with me when I repeat stories. You ask questions nobody else asks." Her voice softened slightly. "You make me feel like a person instead of an obligation." I closed my eyes. Nobody in my family ever spoke directly about love. They performed it through money and appearances and expensive gestures. But my grandmother had always been different. When I was 13 and got rejected from a private summer arts program, she drove me to the harbor, bought me terrible clam chowder from a tourist restaurant, and told me rejection usually had more to do with other people's limitations than my own. When I was 22, and my mother spent an entire dinner criticizing my decision to study interior design instead of law, Eleanor slipped me a handwritten note afterward. "You are allowed to build a life that feels like yours." I still had it tucked inside an old sketchbook. "Mom's going to lose her mind," I said quietly. "That isn't your responsibility." Easy for her to say. Victoria Harrison treated reputation like oxygen. Every conversation was strategic. Every friendship is transactional. Every family gathering is carefully choreographed. And my sister Madison was worse. Madison had mastered the art of looking delicate while getting exactly what she wanted. Growing up beside her felt like competing against someone who understood rules I'd never been taught. Madison got praise for breathing correctly. I got advice. Madison wore white cashmere sweaters and dated investment bankers and somehow always looked polished, even carrying groceries. I spilled coffee on myself at least twice a week and once got lost in my own parking garage for 20 minutes. My mother used to say Madison had grace. What she meant was that Madison knew how to perform perfection. "You'll need to be careful," Eleanor said. "With what?" "Your mother." A strange feeling moved through me then. Not fear exactly, recognition, because there was something in my grandmother's voice I hadn't heard before. Disappointment, not annoyance, not frustration, something deeper. "She'll try to pressure you," Eleanor continued. "Do not let her." "I won't." "Promise me." "I promise." There was a brief silence. Then she said something I didn't fully understand until much later. "Sometimes the people closest to us believe they are entitled to pieces of us simply because they helped create us." The rain outside intensified. I remember standing there barefoot on cheap apartment flooring, thinking how strange it was that my grandmother sounded tired. Not physically. Spiritually. Like she'd spent years carrying knowledge too heavy to put down. "I love you, Paige. I love you too." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time staring at nothing. Part of me felt overwhelmed. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me felt absurdly emotional over the fact that someone in my family had chosen me. Not tolerated, not managed. Chosen, that feeling lasted exactly 12 days. Because 12 days later, my mother called and asked me to come to the house for what she described as a family conversation. I almost didn't go, but old habits are hard to kill. Especially when you grow up believing your value depends on keeping other people comfortable. Their Beacon Hill townhouse looked the same as it had my entire life. Perfectly arranged, perfectly lit, perfectly cold. The kind of home where decorative pillows cost more than monthly rent and nobody ever relaxed against the furniture because everything existed to be admired instead of used. A house that photographed beautifully and never once felt safe. Richard Harrison sat in his leather chair by the fireplace, reading emails on his phone when I walked in. He looked up briefly. "Paige." "Hi, Dad." Then he returned to his screen. That was our relationship in its purest form. Polite distance. My mother sat on the cream-colored sofa wearing ivory silk and diamonds, despite the fact it was 3 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Madison lounged nearby scrolling through wedding venues on her tablet. At that point, she'd been dating Tyler Caldwell for 2 years. Tyler came from old Boston money and somehow managed to look permanently expensive. Everything about him felt polished in the way private schools produce polished men. My mother adored him immediately, not because he was kind, because he fit. "Sit down," Victoria said. I took the single empty chair across from them and immediately understood this had been staged. 3 against 1. Classic. My mother folded her hands elegantly. "We've become aware," she began, "that your grandmother has made some irresponsible decisions regarding her estate." There it was, not even 30 seconds before the attack started. She made a decision, I corrected carefully, not an irresponsible one. Victoria smiled the way people smile right before they say something cruel. She's elderly, Paige. She's 76, not confused. People become vulnerable. Madison finally looked up from her tablet. It's just weird, she said lightly. Like, why would Grandma leave one person a multi-million-dollar apartment and ignore everyone else? She isn't ignoring anyone. My father spoke then without lifting his eyes from his phone. The ethical thing would be to divide the asset equally. Ethical? I almost laughed. This from a man who forgot my birthdays 3 years in a row after I turned 16. Grandma made her choice. She made it under influence, Victoria replied. Something sharp moved through me. Influence? You spend all your time with her. You isolated her from the family. I stared at my mother. You mean I visited my grandmother? You manipulated a lonely old woman. There it was, the accusation, not spoken emotionally either, spoken strategically, like groundwork already being laid. I looked around the room. Nobody seemed shocked she said it, which meant they'd discussed this before I arrived. You really think I manipulated Grandma into loving me? Don't twist my words. Then explain them. Victoria's expression hardened. You've always had a talent for making yourself the victim. That sentence reached back through my entire childhood. Every argument, every disappointment, every moment I tried explaining hurt. Somehow it always circled back to me being dramatic, too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult. Meanwhile, Madison could cry over a broken nail and my mother would reorganize the universe around her. I looked at my sister. Do you actually care about Grandma's feelings in any of this? Madison crossed her arms. Of course I care. When's the last time you visited her? That's not fair, I'm busy. Busy. Everybody in my family used that word like currency. Busy meant important. Busy meant successful. Busy meant morally superior. I worked 60-hour weeks building my design business and somehow still found time to sit with my grandmother every Sunday. But because my work wasn't law or finance or inherited wealth, it never counted. She gave me the apartment because she wanted to, I said quietly. That's the beginning and end of it. Victoria's smile disappeared completely. Then you need to understand there will be consequences. I remember how calm she sounded saying it. That was the terrifying part. Not anger, certainty, like she'd already decided punishment was inevitable. I left 15 minutes later after another circular argument that solved nothing. Nobody hugged goodbye. Nobody said drive safe. I walked out of that townhouse feeling like I just attended a board meeting where the agenda was whether I deserved to exist comfortably. And things only got worse after that. Within weeks, I disappeared from family events. Not officially. Officially, there were always excuses. Oh, we assumed you were busy. We thought you were out of town. It was last minute. But suddenly, I wasn't included anymore. I found out about Madison's engagement party through Instagram. 200 guests at the Boston Harbor Hotel. Everyone is smiling beneath crystal chandeliers. My cousins, family friends, people I'd known since childhood. No invitation. I remember staring at the photos while sitting on the floor of my apartment eating cereal at midnight because I'd worked late on a client deadline. There was a picture of my mother holding Madison's face lovingly while they laughed at something off camera. I couldn't remember the last time my mother looked at me like that. Maybe she never had. The worst part wasn't exclusion. It was the stories. Boston is smaller than people think, especially wealthy Boston. People talk. At charity galas, country clubs, law offices, private dinners, and my mother was very good at controlling narratives. Suddenly, acquaintances began treating me differently, carefully, like I might explode unexpectedly. One woman at a networking event touched my arm sympathetically and said, "Taking care of elderly relatives can really blur emotional boundaries." I just stared at her. That's how I realized Victoria had been speaking publicly about me, painting me as manipulative, greedy, predatory. The granddaughter is exploiting a confused old woman for financial gain. And the horrifying thing was how believable she made it sound. Because my mother understood something fundamental about people. If you speak confidently enough, most people stop asking questions. I never defended myself publicly. Not once. I thought dignity meant silence. I thought eventually the truth would become obvious on its own. I didn't understand that silence creates space for lies to grow. By late 2021, my grandmother moved into Brookhaven Senior Living in Wellesley. Luxury facility, private apartment, gardens, medical staff. She told everyone she wanted simplicity, peace, but something about the move never sat right with me, especially because she loved the penthouse. Loved it. She used to sit on the balcony reading case Law for Fun while drinking tea and judging strangers walking dogs below. So one Sunday afternoon, while we sat together watching snow fall across the courtyard gardens at Brookhaven, I finally asked, "Did something happen with Mom?" Eleanor kept looking out the window for a while before answering. "Your mother and I see the world differently. That's not really an answer." "No," she agreed quietly. "It isn't." I waited. Eventually, she turned toward me. "Have you ever loved someone so much that admitting the truth about them felt unbearable?" The question settled heavily between us. I didn't know how to answer because at that point in my life, I still believed love meant enduring almost anything. I think parents spend years believing they can fix their children if they just remain patient enough. She continued. Sometimes patience becomes permission. I remember feeling unsettled after that conversation, like there was something massive moving beneath the surface of our family, and I could sense it without fully seeing it. I should have pushed harder. I should have asked more questions. But denial is a strange thing, especially in families like mine. Everyone knows something is wrong. Nobody says it out loud, and the silence becomes part of the architecture. 3 years passed that way. 3 years of distance, rumors, careful avoidance. My business grew slowly during that time, not explosively, not magically, just steadily. I designed brownstones, office spaces, and restaurants. I learned how to negotiate contracts without apologizing for existing. I hired an assistant, then another. For the first time in my life, I started building something that belonged entirely to me. And maybe that's why what happened next hit so hard. Because just when I finally started feeling stable, my family came back. Not out of love, out of strategy. It was December 2023 when the wedding invitation arrived. Heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering. Madison Harrison and Tyler Caldwell request the honor. I stared at it for a full minute. After years of pretending I didn't exist, suddenly I was invited to the social event of the season. The Fairmont Copley Plaza. Black tie, Boston elite. My phone rang that same night. Victoria. "Did you receive the invitation?" she asked warmly. Warmly. That alone made my instincts sharpen. "I did. I'm so glad." Her voice dripped sweetness. This wedding is a chance for healing. There it was again. Performance. Nothing in my mother's world happened without intention. "We should move forward as a family," she continued. "Especially now." I leaned back against my couch. Now, with Madison starting her married life. And there it was, the real reason. I closed my eyes immediately. "Mom, Tyler and Madison need a home appropriate for their future. Something elegant, something central. The penthouse isn't available. You live alone, so you don't need that much space." I laughed once in disbelief. Grandma left it to me, and families make sacrifices for each other. No, Families demand sacrifices from specific people, usually the ones trained not to fight back. I understood that now. I'm not giving Madison the apartment. Silence. Then her voice changed completely. Cold. You should think very carefully before embarrassing this family. I stared at my dark apartment after she hung up. Outside, snow drifted slowly past the window. Inside, every instinct I had told me something bad was coming. And for the first time in my life, I didn't think staying quiet would save me. I almost didn't go to the wedding. That's the truth. For weeks, I kept the invitation sitting unopened on my kitchen counter like it might disappear if I ignored it long enough. Every time I walked past it, I felt this pressure in my chest I couldn't explain properly. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like my body already understood something, my mind was still trying to deny. Because families like mine don't suddenly become kind. They become strategic. And Victoria Harrison had never done anything without a strategy. The week before the wedding, my grandmother called me at 7 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was still half asleep and fumbling for my phone while my coffee machine hissed in the background. Paige. Her voice sounded different. Focused. Controlled in that specific way people sound when they're trying not to alarm you. "Hey, Grandma, I need you to listen carefully." I sat down immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing yet." Yet, that word stayed with me. "I believe your mother is planning something at the wedding." Outside my apartment window, Boston looked gray and frozen under late winter clouds. What kind of something? I'm not certain. That scared me more than if she'd given specifics. Eleanor Harrison always knew specifics, but I want you to save a phone number. I grabbed a pen from my desk. "Okay, Marcus Webb." She slowly read me the number. "He's my attorney. If anything happens at that wedding, you call him immediately." I frowned. "Grandma, you're worrying me. You should be worried." That landed heavily. I heard papers moving on her end of the line, then her voice softened. "Your mother believes she understands power because she's spent her life around influential people. What she forgets is that I taught power for 31 years. A strange chill moved through me. "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Then why do I feel like you're preparing for battle?" Silence. Not long, just enough. Then she said quietly, "Because some people mistake silence for weakness." I wrote Marcus Webb's number twice in my notebook without realizing it. "Grandma, if she corners you publicly, do not let shame make decisions for you." That sentence would replay in my head for months afterward. At the time, I didn't fully understand it. I thought maybe Victoria planned another manipulation attempt. Another guilt performance. Another scene designed to pressure me quietly. I had no idea how far she intended to go. "I love you," Eleanor said before hanging up. "I love you too." Afterward, I stood in my kitchen staring at the phone, then I looked around my apartment. The plants by the window. Fabric samples were spread across my drafting table. Half-finished client sketches. My life. Simple, messy, earned. I thought about not going. Seriously. I imagined sending a polite excuse and disappearing from the entire event completely. No ballroom, no confrontation, no humiliation. But another thought kept rising beneath that one. Why should I hide? Why should I behave like the guilty person when I'd done nothing wrong? That anger stayed with me all week. Quiet anger, the kind that settles deep instead of burning fast. By Friday evening, I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror trying to decide which version of myself would survive that wedding best. Too elegant, and they'd accuse me of flaunting money. Too plain, and I'd look pathetic beside Madison's world. I finally chose a navy dress that made me feel like myself instead of someone auditioning for approval. Simple lines. Minimal jewelry. Grandma's silver earrings. The same pair that would later hit a marble floor in front of 100 people. I drove into Boston just before sunset. Traffic crawled through Back Bay while my stomach twisted itself into knots I refused to acknowledge. The city glowed gold beneath the fading light, and for a moment I let myself remember being a kid in the backseat while my grandmother pointed out old buildings and told me stories about court cases and architects and the strange history hidden inside cities. Boston always felt different with her, less intimidating. The Fairmont Copley Plaza looked unreal that night, white lights wrapped around the entrance, valets in black coats, luxury cars lined along the curb. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids spilling from silver arrangements. Jazz is drifting through the ballroom. Money has a smell sometimes. Expensive flowers. Wine, polished wood. Perfume that costs more than rent. That room smelled like my childhood. I paused near the entrance long enough to count at least 6 judges I recognized from newspaper articles. Law partners, doctors, old money families. My mother hadn't planned a wedding. She'd staged a social performance, and everyone important was there to watch it. A waiter passed carrying champagne. I took one immediately. Paige. I turned. My father stood near the bar, adjusting his cufflinks. Richard Harrison looked the same as always, perfect posture, perfect suit, perfect emotional distance. "Hi, Dad," he nodded once. "Glad you came." That was it. No warmth, no awkward attempt at connection, just acknowledgement. Sometimes I wonder whether he ever realized how little space he occupied emotionally inside our family. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He was absent from the precise ones. Growing up, he treated parenting like background noise happening near his career. I used to wait by the window when I was little because he'd promised to attend school events and then cancel at the last minute. Once, when I was 12, he missed my piano recital because of what my mother called an important client dinner. 2 years later, I found out it had actually been a golf weekend. After a while, disappointment becomes routine. "You look well," he said politely. "Thanks." Another silence. Then his eyes drifted over my shoulder toward someone more important. Classic Richard. Madison appeared moments later in a cloud of white satin and diamonds. She looked stunning. That part deserves honesty. My sister always knew how to become the center of a room without seeming to try. Her makeup flawless, hair swept back elegantly, smile polished to perfection. Everyone turned toward her automatically. She hugged me lightly. "I'm so happy you came." The words sounded right, the tone didn't. "Of course I came." She pulled back slightly and lowered her voice. "Did you bring them?" I blinked. "Bring what?" "The documents." There it was, not even 10 minutes into the wedding. What documents? Her expression changed instantly, tiny shift, barely visible, but I knew her well enough to catch it. "The transfer papers," she said carefully. "Mom said everything was arranged." I stared at her. "You actually expected me to sign over the apartment tonight?" Madison frowned like I was being difficult over something minor. "Well, yes." The level of entitlement almost impressed me. "You told people this was happening. We already made plans." "Madison, we told Tyler's parents we'd move in after the honeymoon." I laughed once in disbelief. "You announced plans for property you don't own?" Her face tightened. "You don't even use it properly." That sentence hit harder than it should have. "What does that mean?" "You live alone," she said. "You work all the time, you barely entertain, it's wasted on you." Wasted on me? I'd heard versions of that my entire life. Pretty things wasted on the wrong daughter. Opportunities wasted on the wrong personality. Love wasted on someone who didn't know how to perform gratitude correctly. I looked directly at her. "Grandma wanted me to have it." Madison crossed her arms. Grandma was emotional. No, Grandma was intentional. That made her jaw tighten. "You know what your problem is?" She asked quietly. "You always think being emotionally available makes you morally superior." I almost laughed. Emotionally available. That was how Madison described basic kindness. "I visited our grandmother," I said. "That's not manipulation. You made her dependent on you." The words came directly from Victoria. I recognized it instantly. Families repeat narratives until they sound like the truth. "That's really what you believe?" "I think you enjoyed becoming her favorite." I looked at my sister standing there in couture and diamonds and public adoration, and for the first time in my life, I genuinely saw how deeply unhappy she was. Not sad. Hungry. There's a difference. Nothing was ever enough for Madison because she'd been raised believing love had to be earned through perfection. So when someone chose me freely, without performance, she couldn't process it. Fairness didn't exist in her world, only hierarchy, and she needed to stay above me at all costs. "Mom's going to fix this," she said quietly before walking away. Fix this, like I was the problem to solve. I suddenly wanted air. The ballroom felt too warm, too crowded, too staged, so I slipped onto the terrace overlooking Copley Square and let the cold March wind hit my face. The city lights shimmered below while traffic moved slowly through the evening. Inside, I could still hear music and laughter through the glass doors. I leaned against the railing and tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe this would stay manageable. Maybe Victoria would push privately instead of publicly. Maybe my phone rang. "Grandma." I answered immediately. "You're outside," she said. I looked around in surprise. "How did you know?" "Because when you're overwhelmed, you seek open space." I smiled despite everything. "You know me too well. I had practice raising you." That almost broke me a little, not because it wasn't true, because it was. My grandmother taught me how to cook, how to parallel park, how to speak confidently during interviews, how to disagree without apologizing. Meanwhile, my mother taught me how to monitor rooms emotionally for danger. "Tell me what's happening," Eleanor said. I explained the conversation with Madison. Silence followed, then my grandmother exhaled slowly. "She's already promised the apartment to them publicly." "You knew?" I suspected. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone railing. Why would Mom do that? Because if enough people witness something, she believes it becomes reality. That sentence settled deep inside me because it explained my entire childhood. Every family dinner, every social gathering, every carefully constructed narrative. Victoria didn't want the truth. She wanted consensus. "Paige." "Yeah? If she humiliates you tonight, it will not be because you deserve humiliation." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "She's going to try to force me publicly, isn't she?" Another silence. Then quietly, "Yes." Something in me shifted then, not dramatically, not powerfully, just clearly, like a fog lifting. For years, I'd been trying to survive my family by being smaller, more agreeable, more patient, less disruptive, but nothing I sacrificed ever satisfied them because sacrifice itself had become the expectation. There would always be another demand, another compromise, another way to prove my love, and suddenly I was tired, not angry, tired. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I know. What if she causes a scene?" "She will." The certainty in Eleanor's voice startled me. What if everyone believes her? Then they were already looking for a reason to. The jazz music inside shifted into something louder. People began moving toward the dining area. Dinner service. The beginning of the real performance. "Remember the number," my grandmother said softly. "Marcus Webb." "Yes." I took a breath. "Grandma, what aren't you telling me?" Long pause, then, "I tried very hard to believe your mother was still someone I recognized." The sadness in her voice felt ancient. When you love your child, Paige, admitting what they're capable of feels like grieving someone who's still alive. I swallowed hard. What did she do? Another silence. This one is heavier. Then my grandmother spoke carefully. 6 months ago, a reporter contacted me about a property sale in Cape Cod. I frowned. What property sale? A house I never sold. Everything inside me went still. What? I owned a small property near Chatham for years. In 2020, it was sold for $875,000. I stared through the ballroom windows at my mother laughing elegantly beside a table of guests. I never authorized that sale. Cold moved slowly through me. What are you saying? I'm saying your mother forged my signature. The world tilted, actually tilted. My hand gripped the railing harder. No, I hired forensic analysts. I shut my eyes immediately. No, the signatures were false. I could barely process the words. My mother, forgery, fraud, not manipulation, not emotional cruelty. Crime. She told people I was becoming forgetful around the same time. Elena continued quietly. Convenient, isn't it? I looked through the glass again. Victoria stood radiant beneath chandeliers while guests admired her. My entire childhood flashed strangely through my mind then. Every controlled conversation, every polished performance, every moment she rewrote reality confidently enough that people accepted it, and suddenly nothing felt impossible anymore. She stole from you? She stole from herself first, Elena replied sadly. People like Victoria always do. My throat felt tight. Why didn't you tell me? Because I kept hoping she would confess. She publicly called you unstable. I know, and you still protected her. She's my daughter. Simple, devastating. I understood then something I hadn't before. My grandmother wasn't weak, she was grieving, there's a difference. I've already given Marcus everything, Elena said. The evidence, the reports, the timeline. If your mother pushes this too far tonight, he'll intervene. My eyes drifted again toward the ballroom, toward Victoria, toward the life she'd built entirely from appearances. She's going to destroy herself, I whispered. No, Elena said quietly. She already did. Tonight may simply be when everyone else notices. Inside the ballroom, someone tapped a microphone. The reception was beginning again. Paige. Yeah? You don't owe people access to you simply because they share your blood. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Nobody in my family had ever spoken like that before. Not once. Okay, I love you. I love you too. The line disconnected. For a long moment, I stayed on that terrace staring at my reflection in the ballroom glass. I looked calm. But underneath, everything had changed. Because once you learn the worst thing about someone, you can't unlearn it. And suddenly, my mother's obsession with the penthouse didn't feel emotional anymore. It felt desperate. Inside, guests returned to their tables. Waiters cleared plates. Champagne flowed. Music softened. The performance was entering its final act. And somewhere deep down, I already knew I was walking toward a disaster none of us would survive unchanged. By the time dinner ended, the ballroom had settled into that warm, expensive, glow-wealthy people mistake for happiness. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Waiters floated between tables. The jazz band played low enough for conversation, but loud enough to make silence impossible. I sat near the back, beside distant relatives who barely acknowledged me except for polite smiles between courses. Honestly, I preferred it. The farther I stayed from the head table, the easier it was to breathe. Madison sat beside Tyler beneath an arrangement of white orchids large enough to block half the room. Every few minutes, someone approached to congratulate them while photographers captured carefully staged moments that would eventually become framed memories. Perfect memories. That mattered to my mother more than reality ever did. I barely touched my food, not because I was nervous. Because once my grandmother told me about the Cape Cod house, everything around me started looking fake. Every laugh, every toast, every affectionate gesture. I kept watching Victoria move through the ballroom, greeting guests with effortless charm while knowing what she'd done. How do people live like that? How do they smile normally while carrying something rotten inside them? I still don't fully understand. At one point, Tyler's mother approached my table with a sympathetic expression. "Paige," she said warmly, "your mother tells me you have quite the eye for interiors." There was something careful in her tone, measured, like she was approaching an unstable animal. "I'm an interior designer," I said. "Yes, of course, such creative work." Creative work, another phrase wealthy people use when they don't respect your profession but want to sound polite about it. "We're all very excited about the apartment situation," she continued. Such a generous gesture. There it was again. The assumption, not a possibility, not a rumor, expectation. My mother had already sold the story to everyone in that room. I set my wine glass down slowly. "There seems to be some confusion." Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I'm not giving Madison the apartment." The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds, long enough. Something uncomfortable crossed her face before she recovered gracefully. "I'm sure everything will work itself out." Translation: please don't create problems publicly. That's what people like them care about most. Not ethics. Not true. Comfort. She moved away quickly afterward. I watched her whisper something to another woman near the dance floor. Both glanced toward me almost immediately. I felt suddenly exhausted, not emotionally, existentially, like I'd spent my entire life trapped inside a system where image mattered more than honesty, and everyone agreed to participate because challenging it would inconvenience them. A slow piano melody drifted through the ballroom. Somewhere near the front, Madison laughed too loudly at something Tyler said. Then I saw my mother stand. The room responded instantly. That's the thing about powerful social people. Attention bends toward them automatically. Victoria lifted a champagne glass lightly against her water goblet. The ringing sound cut cleanly across the ballroom. Conversations quieted. My stomach dropped before she even spoke. If I may have everyone's attention for just a moment. There it was, the voice, polished, warm, practiced, courtroom voice, charity gala voice, the version of my mother the world adored. "I want to thank all of you for celebrating this beautiful night with our family." Smiles, nods, soft applause. Beside me, one of my cousins whispered, "Your mom really knows how to host." I almost laughed. Host. As if emotional destruction counted as hospitality when the floral arrangements were expensive enough. Victoria continued speaking gracefully about love and family and legacy while servers paused respectfully around the room. Then she turned slightly, toward me. And speaking of family, the entire ballroom seemed to shift. "Tonight includes something very special." No, every nerve in my body went alert instantly. "Paige," my mother said brightly, "would you come up here for a moment, sweetheart?" 100 faces turned toward me. My pulse thudded heavily in my ears. I stayed seated. "Maybe if I didn't move, maybe, Paige," she repeated gently into the microphone. "Don't be shy." The pressure of public expectations settled over me immediately. People smiling, watching, waiting. This was how Victoria operated, not through direct force, through social coercion. If I refused to walk up there, I'd immediately become difficult, dramatic, disruptive. The daughter is ruining her sister's wedding. I stood slowly. My legs felt strangely disconnected from the rest of me as I walked between tables toward the head platform. I could feel people watching my face carefully, curious, hungry for tension without wanting responsibility for it. When I reached the stage, Victoria wrapped one arm around my shoulders. To the audience, it looked affectionate. Up close, it felt like a restraint. "There she is," my mother said warmly. The spotlight overhead felt blinding. I could barely see beyond the front tables. Most of you know that my mother recently gifted Paige a beautiful penthouse in Seaport. Murmurs spread instantly through the room. "An extraordinary property," she continued. And tonight, Paige has decided to do something incredibly generous for her sister. My entire body went cold. Then she produced a folder. Thick, cream-colored, legal, already prepared, already printed, already assumed. Applause started immediately around the ballroom before I'd even spoken, because of course it did. People love generosity when they aren't the ones sacrificing anything. Victoria opened the folder dramatically. "All that's left," she said, smiling, "is for Paige to sign the transfer document so Madison and Tyler can begin their married life in a home worthy of their future together." More applause, actual applause. I stood frozen beside her, not because I didn't know what to say, because the cruelty of it stunned me. She hadn't just cornered me. She'd built an audience first. A room full of witnesses designed to pressure me into obedience. And the horrifying part, it probably would have worked on the version of me from 5 years earlier. The girl who spent her life trying not to upset anyone. Victoria handed me a pen. "Go ahead, sweetheart." The microphone picked up every sound in the room, every shifting chair, every small cough. I looked down at the paperwork. Transfer of deed. My name is already typed neatly beside signature lines. They really thought I'd surrender publicly rather than embarrass them. I lifted my eyes slowly. "I'm not signing this." The room changed instantly, not loudly, quietly, like temperature dropping before a storm. Victoria kept smiling, tiny crack near the edges now. "Paige," she said softly into the microphone, "this isn't the time for nerves." "It's not nerves." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. My mother's grip tightened slightly on my arm. "Sweetheart, don't do this here." You hear it, that wording, as if I were the one creating the scene. "You invited me onto a stage in front of 100 people," I said evenly. "You brought legal paperwork to a wedding without my consent." Madison stood abruptly beside Tyler. "Paige?" "No," I said quietly. "You don't get to act surprised. You already told people you were moving into my apartment." Several heads turned sharply toward Madison. "Good, let them hear it." Her face flushed. "You knew this was happening. You announced plans for property that doesn't belong to you." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the band stopped playing. Victoria's smile vanished entirely. "Enough." "No." That word surprised even me, because I'd rarely said it to her directly before. Not really. Not without softening it afterward. Not without apologizing. But something about standing under those lights while strangers applauded my humiliation finally snapped something loose inside me. "The apartment was left to me," I said clearly. "By Grandma, intentionally." "Because you manipulated her," Madison shot back. Gasps moved softly across the ballroom. There it was, public accusation. My mother stepped closer to the microphone immediately. "Paige has been under tremendous emotional stress lately. Classic, discredit first, control narrative second." I laughed once quietly in disbelief. "She invited me here under pretenses." "Pretenses?" Victoria repeated sharply. "We invited you because you're family. You invited me because you thought public pressure would force me to hand over my inheritance." Several people looked away uncomfortably. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended me. That part stayed with me afterward. How quickly crowds become spectators when discomfort enters a room. Madison's eyes filled suddenly with tears. Real or practiced, I honestly couldn't tell anymore. "You're ruining my wedding." The audience softened toward her instantly. Of course they did. People forgive beautiful crying women very easily. "You ruined your own wedding when you tried to steal from me," I replied. Tyler finally stood. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," Victoria snapped before I could answer. She was losing control now. I could see it. And losing control terrified her more than anything. "After everything this family has done for you," I almost laughed again. "What exactly has this family done for me?" The microphone carried every word perfectly. My mother stared at me. "Excuse me, you ignored my career, you excluded me from family events. You spent 3 years telling people I manipulated grandma. That is not true." "It absolutely is. You're being emotional." Another classic. Women become emotional the second they stop cooperating. I looked directly at the crowd then. All those polished faces, expensive clothes, curious eyes. "You know what's interesting?" I said quietly. "Not one person in this room ever asked me if any of those stories about me were true." Silence. Nobody moved because they knew, maybe not consciously, but somewhere inside themselves they knew. My mother's face hardened completely. "You ungrateful child." The microphone amplified every syllable. "After your father and I gave you every opportunity." "You mean basic parenting?" A sharp inhale moved through the room. "You think paying for school means you own me forever?" Victoria stepped closer. "You selfish little girl." I looked at her carefully then, really looked. Not my mother, not authority, just a woman terrified of losing control publicly. And suddenly she seemed smaller than she ever had before. "The answer is no," I said calmly. "I'm not giving Madison the apartment. Not tonight, not ever." Something in Victoria finally broke. Her hand moved so fast I barely registered it. 1 second, she stood beside me. Next, her palm cracked across my face hard enough to turn my head sideways. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Sharp, clean, unmistakable. Somewhere behind me, somebody gasped loudly. My earring flew off and hit the marble floor with a tiny metallic sound. Everything stopped. Completely. No music, no conversation. Nothing. My cheek burned violently. But strangely, the physical pain barely registered compared to the realization settling inside me. She had finally done it publicly. No more whispers. No more manipulation hidden beneath manners. Everyone saw. Slowly, I bent down and picked up my earring. It was slightly bent. I fixed it carefully with my fingers. The entire room watched silently. Waiting. I think they expected me to cry. Maybe scream. Maybe collapse emotionally. Instead, I slid the earring back on and looked directly at my mother. "That's the last time you touch me." My voice came out steady. "I'm still proud of that." Victoria looked almost startled, like she expected fear and found something else instead. I handed the pen back to her, then I stepped away from the stage. Nobody stopped me. I walked through the ballroom slowly while people avoided eye contact. Some looked embarrassed. Some are fascinated. Some were secretly thrilled, because scandal excites people even when they pretend otherwise. Near the exit, I heard Madison start crying loudly behind me. Then Victoria's voice rose sharply. Then, overlapping whispers were spreading across the room like fire. I kept walking, out through the ballroom doors, across the lobby, past the concierge desk. Only once I reached a quiet corner near the elevators did my hands finally begin shaking. Not from fear. Adrenaline. Years of swallowed anger are moving through my body all at once. I touched my cheek carefully, still burning. Then I pulled out my phone. Marcus Webb answered on the second ring. "MS Harrison." His calmness steadied me immediately. "It happened," I said quietly. A pause, then understood. "My grandmother said to call if I know exactly why you're calling." I closed my eyes briefly. "What happens now?" "Your grandmother is already on her way." The lobby suddenly felt too quiet after the ballroom. Muted piano music drifted faintly through the walls while guests somewhere behind me continued whispering about the scene they'd just witnessed. I sat down on a velvet bench near the elevators and stared at the marble floor. My cheek still burned, not badly anymore, just enough to remind me it happened. A hotel employee approached, carefully holding a glass of water. "Miss, are you all right?" I almost laughed at the question. Was I all right? My mother had just slapped me in front of half the Boston legal community because I refused to surrender a $2 million apartment. "No," I said honestly. But I will be. He nodded awkwardly and handed me the water before retreating quickly. Nobody ever knows what to do around family implosions, especially wealthy family implosions. I checked my phone. 3 unread texts already. One from an unknown number, "I'm so sorry you were treated that way." Another from a cousin, "What the hell just happened?" And one from Madison, "You embarrassed all of us." I stared at that message for several seconds. Not, "Mom hit you," not, "Are you okay?" Just, "You embarrassed us." The wording told me everything. Even now, after everything, image mattered more to her than reality. I locked my phone without responding. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The ballroom noise rose and fell in waves behind the closed doors nearby. At one point, I heard shouting, "Victoria." Even muffled through walls, I recognized that voice instantly. Sharp enough to cut glass. I leaned back against the bench and tried processing what had just happened. Strangely, I didn't feel devastated. I felt clear. That was the unexpected part. For years, I'd questioned myself constantly around my family. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I misunderstood things. Maybe I really was selfish. But public humiliation has a strange way of removing confusion. There's something almost relieving about finally seeing the truth in full daylight. My mother didn't love conditionally. She controlled conditionally, and the second control failed, punishment arrived. Simple as that. The hotel doors opened. Cold March air swept briefly through the lobby. Then I saw her. Eleanor Harrison walked inside, wearing a long gray coat with Marcus Webb beside her carrying a leather briefcase. Even at 78, my grandmother carried herself with terrifying composure. Not dramatic, not emotional. Certain. The second she saw me, her eyes moved directly to my cheek. Something changed in her expression then. Not shocked. Confirmation, like she'd hoped she was wrong and realized she wasn't. "Paige." I stood immediately. The moment she reached me, she touched my face gently. "She hit you." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Marcus looked grim beside her. My grandmother lowered her hand slowly. Then she inhaled once and straightened. "All right." That was all she said, not outrage, not panic. Just all right, like a judge preparing to enter a courtroom. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Her eyes snapped back to mine immediately. "For what?" "For all of this." Eleanor stared at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You are not responsible for your mother's choices." I think some part of me needed to hear that more than I realized. For my entire life, responsibility inside our family moved downward. Parents created chaos. Children managed consequences. That was the system. My grandmother took my hand. "Let's go." Together we walked toward the ballroom. Marcus is slightly behind us. The closer we got, the louder the noise became. Conversations, tension, sharp overlapping voices. Then the ballroom doors opened, and everything stopped. Literally. The entire room went silent the second people saw Eleanor, because according to my mother's narrative, my grandmother was fragile, confused, practically disappearing from public life. Instead, she walked into that ballroom looking composed and fully aware of exactly where she was. I watched realization spread across faces in real time. Guests turned toward Victoria instinctively. My mother stood frozen near the head table. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear on her face, not social discomfort. Fear. "Mom," Victoria said weakly. Eleanor ignored the greeting completely. She continued walking forward with her cane, tapping softly against the marble floor while every guest watched. Madison looked like she might faint. Tyler suddenly became very interested in his champagne glass. Marcus stopped near the center of the room and set his briefcase carefully on a nearby table. The sound of the clasps opening echoed loudly in the silence. My grandmother finally spoke. "My name is Eleanor Harrison." Her voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom, No microphone needed. For 31 years, I taught constitutional law at Harvard University. Nobody moved. I am fully competent. I am fully aware of my decisions, and I would like to clarify several lies that have been told in my name. Victoria recovered enough to step forward. Mom, this isn't necessary. Yes, Eleanor said calmly. It is. The way she said it stopped everyone cold. No emotion, no volume, just authority. She turned slightly toward the guests. 3 years ago, I amended my estate plan and left my Seaport penthouse exclusively to my granddaughter Paige Harrison. Marcus removed documents from the briefcase immediately. The will was filed legally and properly. My grandmother continued. The decision was intentional and final. I watched faces around the room shift subtly. Confusion, embarrassment, realization. People began understanding they'd been manipulated. Victoria forced a strained smile. Mother, nobody questioned your generosity. No, Alina replied evenly. You questioned my sanity. That landed hard. Several guests visibly stiffened, because now we were entering dangerous territory. Professional territory, legal territory. You told people I was confused, Alina continued. You implied Paige manipulated me. You attempted tonight to publicly pressure her into surrendering property that does not belong to you. Victoria's composure started cracking visibly. This is absurd. No, my grandmother said quietly. Forgery is absurd. The room changed instantly. Actual shock moved through the crowd, not gossip shock, real shock. Victoria went completely still. What? Marcus withdrew another folder from the briefcase. In September of 2020, Eleanor said calmly, a property I owned in Cape Cod was sold for $875,000. I watched Tyler's father straighten sharply near the dance floor. Lawyers recognize danger quickly. I did not authorize that sale, my grandmother continued. Victoria's face lost color visibly. Mom, at the time those documents were signed, I was hospitalized recovering from a fractured hip. The silence in the ballroom became unbearable. Marcus handed several papers toward a nearby attorney guest who automatically accepted them before seeming to realize what he was doing. Forensic analysis was conducted regarding the signatures used during that transaction. Eleanor said Marcus spoke clearly for the first time. The probability of forgery was determined to be 98.7%. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest actually sat down abruptly as if their knees gave out. My mother looked around the room wildly. This is fabricated. Nobody responded. That part mattered. Nobody defended her, because the certainty in Eleanor's voice was overwhelming. Because Marcus Webb looked like a man presenting evidence in court instead of family drama at a wedding. Because deep down, I think some people had always sensed something off about Victoria Harrison. My grandmother looked directly at her daughter then. I spent 3 years hoping you would tell the truth. Victoria's voice cracked sharply. You're senile. Several guests visibly recoiled, not because of the insult, because of how desperate it sounded. Eleanor remained perfectly calm. I provided copies of all documentation to the Suffolk County District Attorney's office last week. That sentence detonated across the ballroom. Actual panic flickered across Victoria's face then, not embarrassment. Panic. You reported me. I protected myself. You're my mother, and you forged my name. Every word hit like a stone. I looked around the room. Nobody looked entertained anymore. This wasn't a scandal now. This was a collapse. Madison suddenly stepped forward. Grandma, her voice sounded tiny, confused, childlike almost. You can't seriously believe Mom would do something criminal. Eleanor looked at her sadly. I believe your mother became someone who values appearances more than integrity. Madison shook her head immediately. No, but she didn't sound convinced. That was the heartbreaking part. I think my sister genuinely built her identity around believing our mother's version of reality. Without that structure, she didn't know who she was. Victoria turned toward my father desperately. "Richard, say something." Everyone looked at him, and for one long, awful moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, "I didn't know about the Cape Cod property." The room shifted again, because that wasn't denial, that was distance. My mother stared at him like she'd been slapped herself. "You signed the paperwork. You told me where to sign." Her face twisted completely then, not elegant anymore, not controlled, just furious. "You coward." Richard looked exhausted suddenly, older. "I trusted you. You were supposed to." There it was. The truth is hiding inside the marriage, not a partnership, compliance. My grandmother closed her eyes briefly, like the entire scene physically pained her. Then she opened them and looked directly at Victoria. "You could have apologized." The room remained perfectly silent. "You could have admitted what you did. Instead, you spent years destroying Paige's reputation to protect yourself." My throat tightened unexpectedly, because hearing someone say it aloud changed something. The damage became real in a new way, publicly acknowledged, not imagined, not minimized. Real. Victoria looked toward the guests desperately again. "I did everything for this family." No one answered. "You all know me." Still nothing. That silence probably hurt her more than accusations, because Victoria Harrison built her entire identity around social approval. And suddenly, the audience stopped performing belief for her. My grandmother reached for my hand. "I should have protected you sooner," she said quietly. I shook my head immediately. "You're here now." Eleanor squeezed my fingers once, then she looked around the ballroom one final time. "I won't stay any longer," she said calmly. "This is still my granddaughter's wedding day, despite everything." That sentence somehow carried more dignity than anyone in that room deserved. Marcus began gathering documents back into his briefcase. Guests stepped aside automatically as we turned toward the exit. Nobody tried stopping us. Nobody spoke. The ballroom that once felt glittering and powerful now felt hollow. Like a stage after the audience realizes the performance was fake. Right before we reached the doors, Tyler's father finally spoke. "Victoria," his tone carried pure legal caution now, not friendship, distance. "We'll be advising Tyler carefully moving forward." Translation: "Your scandal is now dangerous to our reputation." I looked back once. Madison stood completely frozen beside Tyler. Mascara streaked, flowers wilting slightly behind her, wedding unraveling around her in real time. And for a second, I felt sorry for her. Not because she lost the apartment, because she built her entire future around the wrong person. Then we walked out. And behind us, the ballroom exploded into noise. The cold air outside the hotel felt unreal after the ballroom. Sharp, clean, honest. For the first time all night, I could breathe without feeling watched. Traffic moved slowly through Copley Square while rain threatened somewhere above the city. The sidewalks glowed beneath streetlights, reflections stretching across wet pavement like broken gold. My grandmother stood beside me quietly while Marcus called for the car. Neither of us spoke at first. There are moments when language feels too small for what just happened. This was one of them. Finally, Eleanor adjusted her coat and looked toward the hotel entrance behind us. I kept thinking she would stop. Her voice sounded tired now, not physically, emotionally exhausted in a way I'd never heard before. I kept believing there was still a line she wouldn't cross. I swallowed carefully. She crossed it a long time ago. Yes. That single word carried decades inside it. Marcus stepped slightly away to finish his call while my grandmother and I stood together beneath the awning. Inside the hotel lobby, silhouettes moved behind glass. Guests leaving early. People gathering in clusters. Phones are already out. Boston would know by morning, not officially, socially, and in communities like ours, social judgment travels faster than headlines. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Eleanor looked genuinely confused. "For what?" "For all the years you spent dealing with this alone." Something fragile passed across her face then. I thought protecting the family meant protecting silence. She stared out toward the street. That's the lie women in our generation were taught. I felt that settle somewhere deep inside me, because my mother inherited that lesson too. The difference was what she did with it. My grandmother used silence to preserve peace. My mother used silence to preserve power. A black town car pulled to the curb. Marcus returned beside us. Before we could move, the hotel doors burst open behind us. "Paige." "Madison." I turned slowly. My sister stood just outside the entrance, still wearing her wedding gown. Her makeup had streaked beneath her eyes, and for the first time in my entire life, she looked completely unprepared for the world around her. Not polished, not composed, lost. Tyler wasn't with her. That fact registered immediately. Madison looked between me and Grandma uncertainly. "Can we talk?" Eleanor glanced at me but said nothing. My choice, for once. I nodded carefully. Madison walked closer. Rain misted lightly around us now, tiny droplets catching the streetlights. "What Grandma said in there?" Madison's voice shook slightly. "That can't be true." I looked at her for a long moment. "You think she invented forensic reports for fun?" "She's angry. She's devastated." Madison wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "My mother wouldn't forge documents." "Your mother, not Mom, interesting." "She already publicly accused Grandma of being mentally unstable," I said quietly. "You heard that yourself." "That's different." "How?" Madison opened her mouth. Nothing came out because there wasn't an answer, just denial trying desperately to survive. "She's still our mother," she whispered finally. There it was, the core of it, not logic, not evidence. Loyalty. Family systems like ours survive by making loyalty more important than truth. I understood that now. "She slapped me tonight," I said softly. Madison flinched slightly. She was upset. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they surprised me, because some small part of me still hoped she'd say something different. "She publicly humiliated me over property that was never hers. You embarrassed her first." I stared at my sister standing there in ruined satin beneath Boston rain and realized something painful. Madison genuinely believed preserving our mother's image mattered more than protecting me. Maybe she always had, and maybe I'd spent years refusing to see it clearly because admitting it hurt too much. "You know what the saddest part is?" I asked quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine. "I would have done almost anything for you if you just treated me like your sister instead of competition." For the first time all night, Madison looked genuinely shaken, not defensive, wounded. "I never competed with you." I almost laughed. "You competed with everyone." She shook her head immediately. "No, Mom compared us, that's different." That stopped me, because it was the first honest thing she'd said. Rain tapped softly against the awning above us. "My whole life," Madison continued quietly, "I felt like if I wasn't perfect, she'd stop loving me." The vulnerability in her voice felt unfamiliar, like hearing a language she normally hid. "When Grandma chose you," she swallowed hard. It felt like proof I failed somehow. I looked at her carefully then, really looked, and suddenly I saw it, not just entitlement, fear. Madison had spent her entire life performing perfection because she thought love depended on it, and my grandmother choosing me without performance shattered the system she built her identity around. "That still doesn't excuse what happened," I said gently. "I know. Does it?" She didn't answer. Behind us, the hotel doors opened again. Tyler stepped outside with his father. Both stopped immediately when they saw us. Tyler's expression tightened, his father's became unreadable. "Madison," Tyler called carefully. The distance in his tone told me everything, not warmth, not partnership, liability assessment. She turned toward him. You left. His jaw shifted slightly. This situation is complicated. Complicated. Another rich person word. Translation: your family scandal threatens me socially. Madison stared at him like she genuinely hadn't expected abandonment. Maybe she hadn't. Tyler's father stepped forward slightly. We'll need to postpone travel plans until legal matters become clearer. Legal matters, not family matters, not emotional matters, legal exposure. My grandmother watched them with quiet exhaustion. Then she spoke calmly. You should go home, Madison. My sister looked suddenly very young. What if she gets arrested? No one answered immediately, because none of us knew. Finally, Marcus spoke carefully. The district attorney will review evidence and proceed accordingly. Madison's face crumpled slightly. She's still my mom. Eleanor's expression softened with heartbreaking sadness. I know, that was the tragedy of it. No matter what Victoria had done, she remained connected to us. Blood doesn't disappear just because trust does. Madison looked at me again. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. For years, I would have answered that question for her. Fix things, soften things, made myself smaller so someone else could stay comfortable. But I couldn't anymore. That's something you'll have to figure out yourself. She stared at me silently. Then slowly, she nodded. Tyler placed a hand lightly against her back, not comforting, guiding, managing. The difference was subtle but impossible to miss once you saw it. They walked away together toward another waiting car while Tyler's father remained behind briefly. He looked directly at my grandmother. I'm sorry. And surprisingly, he sounded sincere. Eleanor nodded once. So am I. Then he left too. The rain intensified slightly. Marcus opened the town car door, but before my grandmother got inside, she turned toward me. Come have dinner tomorrow. I smiled faintly. After tonight? Especially after tonight. Something inside me loosened then, not healed, just loosened, like maybe survival was finally possible without constant performance. Eleanor touched my cheek gently one last time. You did nothing wrong. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, because nobody had ever said that to me after conflict before. Growing up, every family argument ended with me apologizing eventually, even when I wasn't wrong. Especially when I wasn't wrong. I nodded carefully. Good night, Grandma. I love you, Paige. I love you too. She got into the car with Marcus, and I stood there watching the taillights disappear into rainy Boston traffic. Then suddenly I was alone, completely alone, and weirdly it felt peaceful, not empty, free. I walked slowly toward the parking garage with rain dampening my hair and makeup while my phone buzzed endlessly inside my purse. Texts, calls, notifications. I ignored all of them. Halfway across the street, my phone rang again. Daniel Reeves, I answered this time. Please tell me you're not at the center of whatever legal chaos just exploded online. Despite everything, I laughed. A real laugh, tired, disbelieving, human. How fast is it spreading? Fast enough that 3 reporters are already trying to confirm details. Classic Boston. Scandal before midnight. Analysis by breakfast. You okay? Daniel asked more quietly. I looked up at the city around me. Rain falling softly. Traffic lights changing. People moving through ordinary Friday night lives completely unaware that mine had just cracked open. And strangely, yes. I think, I said slowly, this might be the first honest night my family's had in years. Daniel stayed quiet for a second, then, that sounds painful. It is. Another pause. But it also feels like breathing after being underwater too long. I reached the garage entrance and stopped beneath the concrete overhang. Listen, Daniel said carefully. Whatever happens next, your mother's choices are hers. Don't let people make you carry responsibility for them. Funny. That was the second time someone said that to me tonight. Maybe healing starts when enough people repeat the truth until you finally believe it. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time without turning the engine on. Rain hit the windshield steadily. My reflection stared back at me faintly through the dark glass. Smudged makeup, tired eyes. A red mark is fading slowly across my cheek, but underneath all of it, I looked different somehow. Not happier, clearer, because losing illusions hurts, but it also creates space for reality. And reality, even painful reality, is easier to survive than pretending. I drove home through sleeping Boston just after midnight. When I finally walked into my penthouse, the silence felt soft instead of lonely. I kicked off my heels near the door and stood by the windows overlooking the harbor. City lights shimmered across dark water below. This apartment, this life, this future. Mine, not because I manipulated anyone, not because I won something, because someone loved me honestly enough to choose me without conditions. And maybe that was what terrified my family all along, not the inheritance, the fact that love existed somewhere inside our family, without control attached to it. I stood there watching the harbor until dawn slowly began turning the sky pale blue. Then, for the first time in years, I slept without feeling guilty for taking up space.